brand based out of Bangalore and founded by Mr. Vikas. Today, Happilo is doing almost about 180 crore annual run rate and have products ranging from smaller sizes to larger sizes across e-commerce, modern trade, and general stores. Essentially, in products like dry fruits, dried nuts, um, and now in the process of launching a lot of other new product variants, which Vikas will of course tell us through the journey. So, Vikas, all of us are keen to ask you a lot of questions, but before we begin, it'll be good to have, some sense from you as to why Happilo, and when you started, what did you have in mind? Where do you want to take this company and what are you trying to do here?
Thank you so much, Vineet, for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be on the platform. Hope the Feature Friday completes thousands of episodes, and we have people coming here weekly and inspiring people and building the community.
Thank
So,
you.
you know,
Pleasure is
yeah.
ours.
So, to talk about the journey, I think. So I'll just tell you what Happilo is about. So Happilo is about healthy eating. We wanted to promote happiness and love. So that is how the word Happilo came about. And also we wanted to be little out of the dictionary, and so that we get easy registrations and all. And wanted to be little quirky and catchy. So Happilo, that's how the name was born. And we are basically a gourmet snacking brand. Primarily we started off with nuts. We expanded to trail mixes, nut fusions, dates, and a lot of other options like peanut butter, and then we moved on to snacking options based on peanuts, corns, and other products as well. So we launched in the year 2016, and as a small proprietary concern, then we actually registered to be incorporated as a private limited company in 2018, when we thought we could get good traction. And basically one of the USPs of our company is the roasted nuts and seeds. What we actually sell, the roasted ones are one of the best in the industry. We don't use any oils to roast them, because the nuts and seeds are naturally rich in oils. So we just use that natural stuff to actually bring out the best in terms of taste. We also then have improvised in terms of flavors, in terms of pack sizes, in terms of single serves, multi serves, and when we started off in e-commerce in late 2016, we were one of the early drivers in the category. In fact, the category itself, was very, very open, and there were opportunities where you can work from. Before that, I was a retailer. I used to do a lot of retailing of gourmet products. I was trying to build a retail chain of stores, something similar to a Nature Basket today. So that time, I think, started in 2011, post my MBA in marketing from Symbiosis SCMHRD. So post my MBA, I thought, I should build a retail brand, because that time retail was quite hot. Typically, only the couple of retailers like Big Bazaar or Food World existed at that time. So during my retail days, I was able to scale from 1 store to 18 stores in a period of 4.5 years. And during that time, actually, interacted with a lot of international brands. But availability was a problem in India, and and the shelf life was a big concern, because India was a big country, and there are a lot of regulation in terms of food clearance in India, and a lot of that time Make in India was not so popular, and everything was imported from internationally, like brands like Tong Garden, Planters, Blue Diamond were all imported across the oceans, and sold in India. Again, they didn't have any focus on Indian market, because Indian market was very fragmented, though pretty big, but it was very fragmented, only controlled by the likes of Crawford Market, or the unorganized sectors per se. Even today, the market is typically 95% unorganized in the industry. So we thought it's a great opportunity. So I exited retail in 2015, then launched Happilo in the late 2016. So it was no looking back from there, and we started off very small with around 6 SKUs, and we went to Big Basket first, and we did a deal with them, and we wanted to define the category with them, and they were quite happy, because at that time there was an opportunity that the category was quite empty. Though a lot of international brands were not coming on time to the shelves. A lot of shelves were empty. So it was a good opportunity for them to have somebody like us. And that's how it started. And from 2016, we slowly built on the brand. Today we have more than 40 distributor partners across the nation. And we are a strong brand across all channels, like e-commerce, or maybe travel retail like Relay or WH Smith, or maybe modern trade like the Spars and the Big Bazaars, and also in terms of general trade or the A-class supermarkets. So now we are on the verging, we raised our first Series A fund last month, and proud to say that Venture Garage had the major role to play in that, and it happened in February, and now we are actually looking to take it to the next stage of growth with the capital what we have raised, and we are planning to crack the GT code, which is one of the toughest in the FMCG industry, and that is what we are set out to do. That's the that I would like to end my introduction on that.
Thanks so much for that, Vikas. I hope everyone got a gist of what you're trying to do. So Vikas, over the course of 3 years that we have been working with you, we've seen the business grow almost about 3 times every year, right? And FMCG is a business that would typically require a lot of investments, primarily in brand building, working capital. But in your case, you managed to grow the business this fast and to this scale without any external funding, right? So for our entrepreneurs, can you throw some light on key things that you did that helped you get to this level without any money?
See, initially it was very tough, right? Without money, you cannot hire people. Without money, you cannot do marketing. You cannot build a distribution channel. You cannot appoint distributors. See, people don't, because once you're funded, right, people perception changes. But we always thought it's not about building perception; it's about building a valuable business for us. So initially, we wanted to raise money, no doubt about it, but we choose a different route. We did not choose the VC route. We actually took the MSME, the bank support, what is given for the startups. There is something called as CGT MSME. So that is Central Government Scheme for Medium Scale Enterprise. So they give collateral-free loans up to 2 crores without any collaterals if you are doing some automation in your systems. So we actually we applied for a 1 crore loan in 2017. We got around 80 lakhs of that. Then again we did it in 2018 and we got a crore again. So and we were lucky in that aspect, and the interest rate was pretty low. It's 7 to 8% kind of interest rate. So we always thought of not diluting too early and trying to utilize the available resources. So that was the thought process of with a couple of crores from the bank without any collateral and at a very low rate of interest was very helpful. And also, there are a lot of schemes for going. In fact, the schemes have improved now. So, and now also there is a subsidy for, all the automation. Almost 35% was given back to you. Again, it depends on every state to state. Karnataka had an option where 35% was given back to you on your automation, whatever you have installed. They do facility audits and verifications and all. So, very different, depending on which state you come from, and at least minimum 15% subsidy is guaranteed. So that was one thing we utilized whatever resource was available in the market, and we did not want to raise early because we did not want to dilute early. So if you dilute early, then end of the day, when you go for a bigger round, you have to give up a lot of equity and control in the company. So we always thought of going through this route, and that helped us actually not dilute equity in the early stages.
Correct. That's very helpful, because so initially to start the business, of course, some bank loan. But also, like I mentioned, so on the FMCG front, working capital management is one of the toughest tasks. So can you throw some light? How did you manage that piece of the business? Because I've seen that is the challenge that most startups come to us with when they are doing FMCG startups.
Right. See, again, for me, what helped is I had some background where I had a lot of network which I built over a period of time. Maybe with my MBA days or my retail days, or my even days before that. So networking helps a lot. So what I would recommend is you have to know if you're well networked, then you are able to actually leverage that network, right? So the packaging material supplier at that time knew that we didn't have much money, to pay him upfront. Usually, any new brand, they don't trust so easily, right? But still, we are able to take credit from them and utilize that money to actually procure that, produce the goods, sell the goods, and then pay it to him. But he was very supportive at that. And what we did, we gave him back in the terms that we never got to any other vendor. We built a rapport with him. So he's happy that if the brand grows tomorrow, I will have the lion's share of the business, and that's what he's still doing today. So basically, it's about building network, building trust, and building the relationship where you give back to people who support you. And capital management, working capital was basically managed where we are actually able to convince our distributors to pay a little early, and convince our suppliers to take it little late. So we gave them the bigger picture, and we're able to live by the words. And basic funding what we got from the bank actually helped us be up to true to our commitments.
Right. So just for our viewers to know, so Vikas has scaled Happilo to this level, 180 CR annual run rate without taking any external VC funding, and just a bank loan of say about 1.5 2 crores, right? So tremendous, Vikas. Must congratulate you on that
Thank
piece.
you so much.
So Vikas, you come from a traditional business background, right? So what opened up your mindset to VC funding, and why VC funding, came to your, how you thought why VC funding could be helpful for you to scale the brand?
See, I come from Marwadi Jain community background, right? Pretty traditional, and we are not exposed to this kind of activities as such. But I think my MBA days actually inspired me to take this route to build brands and to make an international mark. See, to be honest, we could have run the show without the VC funding as well, because we were working it managing very efficiently. So, but the problem is, once you are at a decent scale, now there is a risk of being taken over by somebody else, right? A planters can say tomorrow that I'll come into India with a 500 crore marketing budget, and let's see, how we can actually work that out. So we thought if somebody, tomorrow can decide, to come out with some aggressive budgets and try to take over the market by storm, we thought we should be well prepared and we should build a shield around it. Today, being available, the problem is solved to a much extent for us in terms of e-commerce or modern trade or general trade. But now we have not done much ATLs, in terms, we're always focused on doing BTLs. But we thought we should have a strong ATL campaign. We should have some, celebrities, actually help us, create a larger than life brand image. And you also wanted to go, had aspirations to go international. So, we want somebody in US sitting in their boardroom and discussing Happilo, saying that how this brand has transpired and how it is selling across the globe, how we talk about the international brand today sitting in India. So that was the mindset, I firmly believe we would have taken it a little further ahead without raising the fund, but we thought to have that fire, so that, if the petrol tank is full, right, you can go the journey without worrying about the economies of the mileage. So that's how it was.
Got it. Very interesting. So essentially the idea was to, what you could do yourself, say in about 10 years, try and do it in about 3 years, and that's why external capital.
And more to be a global brand.
And to build, yes. So the vision also mattered. So because when you started off in this journey and when you started speaking with VCs, of course, this was your first interaction ever, right? What is the kind of response that you got from VCs? Of course, some positive, some negative, and I'm sure, because we were alongside in the journey, so a lot of, responses that were not very encouraging as well, right? So before we get to how you finally got a term sheet, if you could explain that process for our startups.
See, I think I would have been rejected 15 times or more before actually someone accepted me. So it is a part of the journey, and the rejections were more meaningful, and they taught us more than actually what somebody accepting us actually believed in us. So whenever we used to pitch in our early days, right? So people used to not actually validate the idea, or they were never thought it's scalable, or but we proved them wrong, and without even raising funding, we're actually able to scale it to a level where in India, I think very few food companies actually compete in that space. If you leave the top 10 brands in India, I think for a startup to scale up, we actually made them look little differently to us after their initial rejections. And in fact, most of them, almost all of them, came back to us and saying that we really missed out, and we're pretty naive in not understanding the opportunity at the right time. I say it's not like that. The market is still open. Maybe in future we'll come back to you and try to work together. I think there are a lot of rejections, to be honest, and I was a bit nervous as well. First couple of rounds or the pitch what we did, pretty nervous. I think you and Veerpay also will be knowing that it was little uncomfortable, but again, that was the journey which was very fruitful at the end of the day. I think those 5-7 early calls and early rejections actually helped us streamline our processes, or the skill sets, or even the mindset, how to approach things and how do we build the business and take it up as a challenge and try to improve on that.
Right. Thanks, Vikas. Vikas, of course, a lot of feedback taken from investors, incorporated that in your pitch, in your product, in your business model, and going back to the same investors again. And of course, the rate of growth of the business was something that built a lot of conviction, right? A lot of investors came back. Post the lockdown, okay. So I want to get to the funding piece, but before that, for our viewers, So around March 2020, or in fact February 2020, the business was doing about 7 crores of monthly run rate, right?
No, I think it was 4 crores.
4 crores.
Four
Right,
to
right.
five crores.
4 to 5 crores. And when the lockdown happened, most entrepreneurs were disheartened and expected their businesses good to go down. But instead, Happilo rose back and crossed the 10 CR mark in May, right? So, what is it that how did you react to the lockdown, and what are the changes that you made in the business that in a environment like that, when somebody would expect a business to fall, you grew 2x over the period of just about 2 months?
See, what happened in March, right, when the lockdown was officially announced, we had predicted that something this like is going to happen. So we actually stocked up on a little bit of inventory, in the March. But last 15 days we had no orders because effectively everybody was worried what will happen tomorrow. But we were on the other side actually preparing a scale at the back end where we were prepared for some eventuality to happen. So when the lockdown was actually announced, we were pretty disappointed. I think last 10 days or 15 days of the month of March, we had no business at all, no billing, no going to office and all those things. First week of April was also similar note. 10th of April, which is when I decided that we have to do something about it, right? We was listening on TV that food companies will be allowed to operate. Food is essential. There was harakiri that people were doing a lot of black marketing of food products, because they were worried that khana milega nahi milega. People wanted to stock up. 1 kilo chahiye to 5 kilo stock up karo. So that mentality was sitting in. So we went to the assistant commissioner of police here locally. We told them we are a food company and we fall under the essentials. Right? People want to eat stuff sitting at home also. And our category per se was a healthy category as well, because it was actually supporting the immunity and other aspects as well, right? So we went to him with a letter saying that please allow us to open. We had to go there a couple of times convincing. Finally approved. He said only 6 people can be allowed in the facility. We typically have 60 to 80 people in the facility. He said 6 people because he wanted to maintain that social distancing. Then after a lot of deliberation and all those things, and I think around 12 people were allowed to work. So that's how it started. A little bit of very uncomfortable. It was like being in some prison or something. You're allowed to work very tight working schedules. You're not allowed to roam around anywhere. Constantly you are checked whenever you are on the street going to your office. People are checking you. कि भाई कहाँ जा रहा है, क्यों जा रहा है, लॉकडाउन है, कहाँ जा रहा है. So we actually overcame all that. It was a lot of fun and a lot of tough times as well at that time. But then slowly things evolved. Even I had to go to police station once. A police constable came and took a video and shuttered the factory and said, "Chalo police station. काय को बोला इधर?" So I had to go there and sit for 3 hours on his bench. I said, "Boss, हमारे पास permission है." So he was not ready to listen. So we came all that. So April, second part of April, we were able to operate. And then May happened. A lot of businesses were actually not functioning, and we were actually taking that risk and incentivizing people, our own staff as well, to come to work. And we actually paid all our employees. Even when the lockdowns happened, people were sitting at home, but we thought we will not remove anyone, but we'll always support their livelihood as well. So April and May was that. By June, most of the people, because we are a full company, everybody came back, and then and God has been kind, and and we were able to do very good numbers. That's the reward of actually trying to do things when nothing was happening.
So it wasn't an easy journey. So even during the lockdown, a lot of hustling required to
lot of
that rate, right? Right, right. So for our viewers, after the lockdown is when we started actually getting a lot of interest from investors, because that's the time when they really saw the build the conviction in the business. And thanks to Vikas's efforts and Happilo growing at that run rate, even that in that environment, over the last 1 year, we got almost about 4 or 5 offers or more, I think. Yeah. So, because what I wanted to ask you is, typically we've seen as entrepreneurs, we've learned to take money whenever it's on the table, right? Whenever it's lying on the table, just don't say no. But in your case, you got multiple offers at multiple valuations, but you still kept looking for the right investor and the right value. So how did you, juggle between the 4 offers? It is not an easy thing to maintain and keep all the 4 offers alive, right? Typically, one would decline and then move to the next one. But so how did you manage the entire juggling between that?
It was a real tough time, to be honest. I think I must have had hundreds of late night discussions with you on that. Maybe we always agree to disagree as well on most of the topics as well.
Yes.
So it was a really tough time. It is not easy to choose. Basically, we wanted to go someone who can add more value to the board because you end up, having somebody on the board as well. So wanted somebody who can actually add value to the board, not only give money to us. And second thing, we wanted somebody who can come with the pedigree that tomorrow in thick and thin, he will be able to stand by us. And that was one of the reasons why we chose A91 as our official investor. But we also had a couple of very good deals from very good partners as well. But by the time we had actually morally agreed to A91 that we are going ahead. So वो धंधे में होता है ना, मतलब जबान दे दी, वो वाली बात हो गई थी. So we never wanted to go back on that. We always wanted to set that benchmark so that not going back on our commitment. So that was the thing. Otherwise, we actually had a couple of more interesting offers at 20-30% more beneficial to the company as well. But again, it was a fight between the heart and the mind. Heart says you're already committed. Mind was saying you're a businessman. I said no, but the commitment is more important because I think this is not the only round what we do, and because it's for doing business, not a one-time transaction, right? So we thought the mind should not win there. By win by the heart, by the commitment. That's how we chose A91. I think, but all of them were pretty good investors. But A91, I think the pedigree was something which we did like, and the support what they had, the content what they bring to the table, the kind of network they open up. So I think that's one of the reasons why we chose A91. But all other investors had their own benefits as well. But just not we had made a moral commitment as well. We did not want to go back on that.
Right. So the key takeaway for all of us here is to don't underestimate the value of your business, right? Look for the right investor with the right pedigree and with the right value that he can the investor can bring on board. And of course the offer also has to be exciting enough. For our viewers, we of course cannot disclose the valuation and the dilution, but what I can tell you is that the first offer that we got, and the finally before we took A91, the difference in the valuation of being offered was almost about 4 times, right? So if it's important to value your own business in your head so that your investor can value that. So because about A91, when we went through the entire process, it took us almost about 3 months to close the entire transaction, starting from the negotiations to the term sheet, the shareholders agreement. And I must tell you and the viewers that you're one of the hardest negotiators I've ever seen, in a term sheet and a shareholder agreement conversation. Most of us as entrepreneurs, of course, have not seen a documentation before like that in the past, right? So what is it like to see that in the first place, in the first time, and and of course not getting very desperate and accepting terms. So even like standard terms that we are used to as investment bankers, you were able to negotiate on a lot of that which we weren't able to do it. So what is the sauce around this that you can share with our founders?
See, I think I can tell you that Venture Garage was a good guide for us. To be honest, even I think Vivek is not there on the call, right?
He's also here.
Acha, okay. So I had a lot of discussion with Mr. Vivek, कि क्या करना चाहिए, क्या नहीं करना चाहिए. Sometimes you used to say ये करना चाहिए. I said नहीं ये नहीं करूँगा मैं. Sometimes you should say कि मैं ये करूँगा, बोले ये तुम कर ही नहीं सकते. So we had those kind of discussions as well. To be honest, I was not so hands-on with the SHAs and the SPAs and everything. To be honest, the term sheet was very new to us. We are just had a couple of term sheets to look at in the real life. Yeah. What you see in Google and all is actually not something which actually comes up, right? So it was little tricky for us, and I had good legal advisors and good financial advisors, so was able to actually understand a bit. And my legal advisor told me, because if you are little studious, by the end of this deal you will be a half legal expert. And I can pat my back and say I know a bit of SHAs and SSPs now. So I had to negotiate, because see, today I want to tell to all my friends listening today, see, money is one thing, but what you end up signing is most important. Because see, in good times those SHAs and SSPAs will never be looked after. कोई खोल के नहीं देखेगा उसको. Nobody will refer to those documents.
Right.
But in the bad times, right? So that is when that the value of those signatures will come true. So money is very important, but also you're taking money against committing what? And over committing sometimes is suicidal. And also the investors value those people who value their equity and value what they're signing on. So that's what I firmly believe that you should know what you're signing on, and that's the most important thing. And again, Marwadi genes also help in terms of negotiations.
Right, of course, we can't get the genes in us, but we can definitely pick your brains. Because okay, so we don't have much time left, and we have questions pouring in. So I would like to ideally get in the Q&A and share some questions that are coming. Please do answer. So Sumant is asking, what are the channels to focus on for a new brand, in what order of priority and why?
Can I see where's the question there?
It's 420.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends totally on what kind of product you're trying to sell. If you have a decent ASP, I think for a new brand, I think you should prioritize e-commerce because the entry barrier is lower. You don't have to go set up a manpower and a distributor and build a little bit of scale before actually you go to market. So for e-commerce, it's very easy to start. You can have your own site, or you can log into the marketplaces like Amazon or Flipkart. So that is a very easy way to start for a new brand. But it is not so convenient as well. But again, you need to be very active there. You need to ensure that you're visible on the site. So visibility takes money. So, right, but though it is no entry barrier, but to grow there also you require money. And second thing would be to looking at something like a modern trade, who gives you a lot of visibility, right? In terms of the nearby vicinity. If you're in the modern trade, the general trade guy will accept you very soon. So if you directly go to a GT market, you have no visibility on e-commerce or modern trade. He will not see you as a brand. He will see you as a very newbie who is trying to do an experiment. But if you're able to establish a little bit of pedigree in terms of e-commerce or modern trade, I think the other channels will open up quite smoothly.
Got it. So when you're launching a new brand, essentially e-commerce is a low barrier, more efficient route. And in the longer run, of course, once you build the brand there, then you'll see more acceptance in modern trade and GT.
Yeah.
Right. So I have one more interesting question from Sumant. So how did you go about identifying your distributors? What are the top markets to launch? And what's your belief in rural India around the FMCG story?
See, if you talk about which are the top markets to launch, I think you should always focus on 4 to 8 top tier cities in India in the initial phase, because the consumptions are little high in that. The consumptions are good. There people have spending power, and also when you talk about the availability of resources, people are well traveled. They understand what they want to buy, and they are prone to go to e-commerce. If you're choosing your this thing as so typically tier 1 cities are typically a good thing to launch. And if you talk about then again, depending on products, if you have a low ASP product, right, you can always focus on tier 2 cities as well. Depending on purely on the ASP, I assume that if an average ASP is 200 and above, I think tier 1 cities is a good way to launch. And second thing would be how do you identify distributors? Basically, you should meet a couple of them in every city or wherever you want to launch. You have to see what kind of products they already sell, right? You cannot actually go and give it to a very new guy who's actually setting up his network very new. He might invest a little bit of money into your business by buying your stock in advance or something like that, but that will not serve the purpose. We want somebody who has a local face value. Assuming you are based out of Delhi and you're setting up a distributor in Bangalore, if the local Bangalore distributor doesn't know stores, or the store people don't realize the distributor, then for you to placing the product is very difficult. You should always remember that distributor is the first salesman, right? So he's face of the company, right? And many people will not see you, but they will see the front end sales guy or the distributor. So I think these are the very priority for an FMCG brand or for any brand for that matter.
Thanks. Right. So before we come to the next question, viewers, you can either drop in your questions here on chat and I will read it out, or otherwise, in about 5 minutes or so, we can have a open session where you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Right. So coming to how much equity we diluted in the round, of course, we cannot disclose. Right. Yeah, but yeah, if you could give us a sense on how did you decide what kind of equity you're willing to dilute, because there will be offers in the market that will ask you to dilute majority of the company. Some will, not value right. So what is the, how do we play around that?
Can you come on question again?
Right. So, one sec. Let me just read the question out also. Right. So, how much did you dilute in the first round? Rajesh is asking. Of course, we cannot, give him the give our view the exact number. But what are the thumb rule that you had in mind? When you were diluting, as to I'm not going to dilute less than this or more than this. I'm not going to give majority in the company. So, what is the thought process behind that you had?
See, typically, in the first round, you should always try to do a minor dilution as well. And unless you are at some scale where you actually require that capital to take to the next level. And it's always good to dilute as low as possible, because you need to control the board as well. So because a lot of decisions tomorrow has to be taken together with the board. But if you fall below a certain number, like less than 50%, then you don't have actually any control on the board itself. So basically, again, it depends on business to business. Now, Amazon, the founder only has less than 10%, but still that doesn't mean Amazon is doing bad. But again, it purely depends on what kind of business you are and what kind of things you're trying to build. In a food company, an FMCG food based brand, I think it's always good not to dilute so early. But in an IT company, you need a lot of capital to build a lot of technology infrastructure, and because the profits come very much later. Initially, it's all about trying to scale up. You see, for example, of Swiggy's and Zomato's or Danzo's, they are still burning every year. So there's no profitability inside. They've also diluted a fair amount of equity as well. So it really depends on what kind of segment you're looking for. I think for a food company, typically, I think dilution has to be around like less than 30% or maximum.
Right. Thanks for that. And also, because we've been working at Venture Garage, we've been working with a lot of FMCG startups, right? So I think I can add some bit there. So what I've seen is that mostly FMCG businesses are in their earlier years are looking for two kinds of capital, right? One is working capital, and the other is capital for growth. Now, going to a bank is not a very feasible option because probably you are negative in profitability or other metrics, and because you don't have a lot of pedigree or vintage, because of which the bank kind of rejects you. So, availing a loan becomes difficult. And that is why a lot of entrepreneurs try and resort to equity route of funding to, fund the working capital requirement. While you can do that in a, first couple of rounds, but it's also not a very good idea because, if you're taking equity funding, it would rather be for growth in the business, probably in deploying in areas like your manpower, your marketing, your brand building, etc. Try to dilute less for working capital. Right. Right. So next question.
Also, investors always love those startups who are actually, they don't want to fund your working capital.
Right. They don't want to fund your working capital. Right. I think, the thought process also matters, right? Okay. Okay. So we have one question from Vivek. A lot of startups get worried because they are running out of money. How are you able to handle that? And yes, I would agree with that because, in the 3 years of conversations that you and I have had, you've never spoken about, we have only this much runway, or we are going to run out of money after this time. Contrary to what, I do hear from a lot of startups, and we talk about runways and how much money do they have in bank account. So how did you, manage this?
See, one thing is we actually did not take external capital. So whatever, again, I tell you that we are a profitable company. Right? So whatever profits we are able to generate, we are actually applying back in the system itself. We used to not even take our own salaries. I used to never take our own salary, but I was to ensure that all the people are paid on time. So I was never, maybe 10, 20 to 20,000 rupees, whatever is required to run my monthly requirement is what I was to draw. And basically, I used to keep couple of months reserves to pay salaries. I thought if I don't pay salary on time, people will not stick on with me. So the key was to actually have some reserves of salary. Remaining everything is invested back in the company. There was no flamboyancy in terms of personal expenditure. We always wanted to keep it simple. We said, let us build the name, the money will automatically come. So we wanted to, put in that hard work. We used to slog like, I personally, I think I used to work like 12 hours. Even today, I work similar to that number. But I think 10 to 12 hours something which I used to put on a daily thing. That I think in the entire COVID era, I think I never took a break on Sunday as well. So, it's all about how you have limited resources. You will be always short of money. So I think the entrepreneurs have to put a couple of odd yards extra than their fellow people, so that you can inspire them, also get more out of them. So I think we were really conservative in terms of our expenditures, but we were very efficient in terms of our management with the resources what we have. And the bank loan obviously helped a couple of crores. And but they do also, they don't look for profits or something. If you are investing in automating your business, they actually help you with a collateral-free loan at a very, very low rate of interest. So that will help actually a lot of startups, right? So, and we are able to only scale because we had that money. We invested in automation in our facility. So when the right time came, we had a little bit of automation to scale up. Otherwise, the opportunity would have been there, but we did not have the resource at the back end. We would have never been able to scale up.
Right. Very useful, Vikas. Okay, so next question coming from Abhishek. What type of products investors prefer to back? Product for, okay, so during the journey, Vikas, what did you understand? Do investors prefer to product brands for masses or products for a niche segment with higher margins?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, kind of, but investors typically like products which are scalable, right? Investors don't fund the idea. Investors fund the scalability of the idea. So tomorrow, if you're able to convince, without any investments, if you're able to convince a lakh people, so today we sell around 1 million packs every month, right? So if you're able to convince 1 million packs to be sold, maybe consumed by half of those people, maybe 1% consuming 2 packs. So if you're able to convince those kind of people without actually investments or without any ATLs, assuming tomorrow if you're able to push the brand a little bit more and being in the TVs and the prints and all, or maybe expand new geographies, I think there's a bigger opportunity there. And also, 2-3 things what the investors look for based on my experiences. One is the market size potential. Assuming you are now trying to create an energy bar, which itself is a very, very niche category, though it is super exciting in the West. In India, people prefer having idli, dosas, poha, paratha rather than an energy bar. In the US, people skip breakfast and use the energy bar as the fuel till the lunch. Right. So that is a option there. People have to understand what they have to launch. We were very excited to launch the bars and all. We studied the market. We thought let it be. Let people build the category. Then we have to actually do something there. Otherwise, see, in India, building category takes a lot of money. Right. So building category is very tough. But building consistency, building a brand over a period of time can be done, but the market size has to be big. So usually the investors will not fund the idea, will fund the scalability of the idea kind of.
Right. So essentially it's the scalability that matters. It is not whether your product is a mass market product or a niche market product. However, of course, there are two basic differences. So if you are trying to do a niche segment, then a lot of market building will be required because it is probably a new category, for example.
To create the category altogether.
Right.
That's the challenge.
So the goal will be to find an investor who is willing to pump in a lot of money alongside and see negative profit and loss statements every month. And if you're trying to do something for the mass market, then you need an investor who believes that there is an existing product category out there, but there is a scope to organize the market and create a brand, right?
Yeah, I think that's what we are trying to do. Right. We have vast unorganized opportunity, and because the market is very fragmented, right. We are trying to make some sense out of it and grow it to the next level.
No, absolutely. I remember a journey, right? When we initially went off to start the fundraising activity, a lot of VCs would say, this is a commodity category. Why are you selling dry fruits, right? How will you scale it? But I think at that time, most of them didn't have a thesis around it. So over time, we were able to find the investors who were willing to back this kind of business. Of course.
Once one investor says yes, right? Then you have a host of people saying yes.
Yeah. You have one saying yes, so everybody will start running after you.
So initially when people say no, everybody will say no. So it's a part and parcel of life, never to get disappointed, and things will happen, and we have to be persistent, and we have to trust our abilities and our vision.
Right. So next question is from Vivek Bhargav, and it seems that you may have answered a bit of it. So how strategic is it to develop your own e-commerce presence? And what is our, at Happylo, what is your revenue mix today in terms of online, offline, and going forward, what is the strategy?
See, it is very, very important to have your own website to directly connect with the consumers, because whenever you sell through marketplaces with all the big names out there, you don't get sufficient data. Right. So end of the day, today data is gold, and tomorrow if you want to do any marketing, any product launch, any sampling, you want to understand who is buying, who is your actual customer. You want to do do an ATL activity, want to do some marketing, you should know who your customer is. So I think own e-commerce gives you that advantage of knowing who your customer is. And in terms of mix, I think we are equally, it's in a ratio of 50-50 in terms of our own online and offline presence. During the COVID era, it was a little skewed towards online because the offline stores were not functional.
Vivek, I hope that answers your question. If you have any additional questions around this, please feel free to ask right here. By the way, viewers, you can directly unmute yourself, ask your question, raise your hand, ask a question, drop in a question here on chat. We would be happy to address it anyway. Right. So next question coming from Maruti Prasad. Have you faced any major issues with distributors and such as demanding high rate of margins, too much debt, or credit time? What's your suggestion and around handling this distributor route?
See, you will find all kinds of people when you go out there in the market. I think building a little bit of scale in a modern trade or in e-commerce will help solve that problem. Otherwise, the distributor will always try to overpower you. But end of the day, you should try to show him a piece where you will be able to contribute to its profits. Because he already has a setup where he's actually invested in the warehouse, manpower, logistics. So if you are able to convince him that the same route, you can also take our products along with you, and whatever you are now doing is actually a net fixed profit for you. You should actually, there's no variable cost associated with it. There's already a truck going along. So there's already just tag along our products as well, and you're going to earn extra margin. But then you do a lot of planning there, right? For example, now if your distributor is supplying to a modern trade or a particular, for instance, say South Delhi, then you should know that when your manpower should get the order from South Delhi, you should also know that when your distributor is actually, that route is going to be, his vehicle is going on that route on a particular, say Friday is fixed for South Delhi. So you ensure that your team gives him all the orders till Thursday. So when the vehicle actually goes to the Friday route, you can always collect that stocks along with him. Otherwise, if you give the orders on Friday, then that will not get connected to the next Friday, because he will say my mat doesn't work and he'll ask for extra margins. So a little bit of optimization in terms of supply chain. I think I once you get into, right, let's say end of the day, it's like sitting on the fence and saying I'll learn swimming and entering in, getting inside and then say I'll learn swimming. So once you get inside, you will understand how do we make the math and little bit of jugaad, little bit of supply chain, things will happen.
Got it. So Maruti, I think you got the gist.
It's not okay. That's a brake cleaner.
Sorry, I think somebody. Ashutosh, are you trying to say something? I think.
Landing.
Okay, I think he got unmute. So yeah, Maruti, key takeaways for you. Distributor channel slightly tougher in the early days. Probably try a direct to consumer strategy, maybe through e-commerce platforms or through your own e-commerce website. Over time, once you build a stronger brand, then the distributor will have more faith in you, and you may not face these challenges. But of course, even if you are today dependent very on the distributor model, try and be more, try and optimize it. That's the suggestion Vikas has for you. Right. Okay. Last question from Harish. For most of VCs, one common question is exit strategy. Yeah. So, what was your answer to this question? I think Vikas, you are on mute. One second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So typically, any VC for that matter, even for that, in an angel investor comes in, says, "Bhai, mera exit kya hoga?" So the confidence has to be there, and we end of the day, it's an eventuality, right? Every investor wants an exit. So typically, we should try to take a longer period of exit time. Typically 5 to 7 years is something which the investor will also be comfortable if you are able to build a scalable business. And there are 2-3 things for an exit. Maybe you can buy back the shares, or you can actually go to an IPO, or you can actually in the next round you can give the exit to the existing VCs who have invested in the company. So, but yeah, you should always keep in mind that exit, the timeline is always there, and that is one of the risks we should have to take after going for a VC funding, because exit is a part, it's a part and parcel of the entire fundraise, and that is the ultimate goal for an investor and the incentive as well.
Right. Okay, so I think we have a reputation for finishing on time, but we are overshooting. But I think we have a couple more questions from Chetan and Jaya coming in. Yeah, Chetan, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please. Yeah, Chetan, we can hear you. Sorry, we can't hear you now. Chetan? Chetan, I will request you to maybe join back again. Meanwhile, Jaya, you can you go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, sir. Good evening. Sir, my name is Jay. I'm from Bangalore. We're working in electric vehicle space. So right now we are prototype tested stage. We got seed funded from one of the venture. So the question is, I'm not sure what will be the correct amount to approach to a venture. Like we typically need a huge amount, but still I'm not quite sure. Like since it is the first investment approach, so not sure like what will be the right amount. So if you can just give me some uh, kind of insight, it'll be.
Vikas, I think you're on mute again.
Yeah. Sorry again. So
No worries.
what I'm saying is, as I told earlier, it typically depends on the industry, what you are trying to achieve. Typically in electric vehicle space, I think you require a lot of money to initially set up the systems because the sale will come much later. It's not that the sales will start happening. And second thing is you have to set up, also provide infrastructure for the charging and the stations basically. So I think definitely I think should look for a larger range, and because the market already is a lot of EV startups are already well funded. So I think you should actually look for a little larger amount, even though that means actually you are giving a little bit of more equity, because that comfort that you have money in the bank and you can actually build a better solution and be little, take little more time to go to market and build a very scalable and a foolproof solution. I think you should look for diluting little bit extra, but I think take a little bit more money.
Right. So Jaya, just to add, you could also crunch your numbers. Your numbers will will tell you how much marketing budgets you require, how much you require in manpower, how much you require in capacity building and other areas. But because as you mentioned, while you do that, you need to ensure that to understand that there are a lot of other electric vehicle startup, and this is going to require a lot of money for you to stay ahead in the game. It is important for you to have money in the bank. So yeah, you should be willing to dilute slightly more than your numbers are crunching for you, right? Right. So one final question, Chetan, you are back.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible this time. Please
Yes.
go ahead.
First of all, thank you, sir, for such an insightful session. So one of my biggest question is that once there was the COVID lockdown, and you also had the loan from the bank, and plus there are competitors in the market. The market distributors won't be ready to give you credit. Plus, you are a good size amount company. You have to pay. You are paying salaries. You did not lay off any employees. So at that very moment, what was your plan of action? It is a big, at that state, it was a very big call what to do next. Either you could have closed your organization for a temporary period of time and you could have continued later, but you chose to continue. So at that moment, it was a tough call. What was your plan of action?
See, to be honest, those tough calls actually define what I am today. To be honest, if that time would have decided to take it a little slow and shut the business for a couple of months and take rest, and that would have been one of the biggest blunders of my life. Instead, I decided to actually try and open the factory warehouse. I actually went to the commissioners and all those things because I thought this is the opportunity, right? This COVID lockdown will not be forever. People need to eat, right? Another day, people have to, even being at home, they can afford not to buy a new mobile phone or not to, spend on non-consumables. But people have to consume. So the mindset was, this is a great opportunity when other people will not take a risk of going to market. They will worry about money, collection, suppliers, creditors, supply chain, everything. We actually paid extra to every logistics guy. We paid extra salary to people who were actually willing to come. We incentivized them, but we ensured that the business was running. And that was one of the advantages where we were actually able to scale 3x during that period because other people were not willing to take the chance. So I think in startups you have to take chances and you have to rise above the mark. Otherwise, there are big people like Tata, Reliance, and Birla, right? They can always do it better than what we do in terms of system, structure, money, capital, team, everything. What the startup has is courage and courage to take more risk. Because those big MNCs cannot take risks. They have so many systems and governance to follow. So So, but the advantage of being a startup is that you can take risk, and I think a little bit of risk should be there if you eventually want to grow and make it big in life.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your response. It was great to be a part of this seminar.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining, Chetan. Right. So, final question, Vikas ji, and very similar, or you can say an extension of what Chetan asked you. So, a couple of key takeaways for the entrepreneurs here on their, 0 to 100 journey, and how, what key things they can do to, really scale fast and reach that milestone fast.
One very important thing, don't dilute too early if your business doesn't demand it. But if your business demands it, as in the case of an EV startup or an IT startup, definitely you should. Second thing to be, keep patience. Things will happen. Be courageous and look for opportunities where you can actually create a mark. I think one is patience and one is not to jump the gun early. Both are very similar, but in terms of fundraising, you have to be not dilute too early. But in terms of taking risks, you should take risks.
Right. So you heard Vikas, everyone, be willing to take risks, right? So that's the most important thing you need. Right, Vikasi, thank you so much for joining us today. It is always a pleasure to interact with you. And I think this is the first time we're hosting you at this session. Hopefully we'll be doing more of such, sessions with you. And a lot of key insights for our startups. We've been interacting for over 3 years, but even for myself, I think there were a couple of new learnings, right? So thank you so much for joining again, and wishing you all the best in the journey, and hope to see you. I hope to see Happilo listed on the Bombay Stock and New York Stock Exchange soon. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Vikas.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.